Greetings and welcome to this week's edition of the Rock County Civics Academy Lesson Plan. The Rock County Civics Academy is a production of Common Sense Reestablished. This LLC was founded by Richard Gruber, Paul Murphy, and Dwayne Severson. CSR is a communications company that provides educational programming on topics of a public interest and is not affiliated with any political party and is committed to common sense-based principles as espoused in the United States Constitution and Bill of Rights. Our programs are nonpartisan. That is, we are not affiliated with any organized or even unorganized political party or political movement. This series of presentations is made possible through the support of our growing list of benefactors, including Big Radio, JATV, Public Access Media, Ragnarsoft, Ragnarsoft.com, Have Camera, Wisconsin, Tom Edwards, The Italian House, Havana Coffee on Milton Avenue. Please keep in mind the views expressed are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily represent the views of our benefactors or the broadcast entities who will be reproducing our content for later public distribution.
Good evening and welcome to this edition of the Rock County Civics Academy. I want to start off this evening with kind of bringing into perspective the issue that we're going to be pursuing tonight, and try and tie together a variety of things that have happened over the course of the last several weeks and have culminated in some actions by the Janesville City Council here most recently. But all of those pieces to a puzzle come together in a way that, frankly, from our perspective, we have more questions now than we had when the proposal first came to the table to build the Woodman Sports and Convention Center. I want the public to know that as we prepared for this evening's presentation, I was thinking back to the original goals that Dwayne, Paul, and I had set when we decided that we would create the Civics Academy. And among those was a promise to ourselves that we would continue to raise issues that we believe are important to the general public and raise them in a fashion where we're presenting them in a nonpartisan way. We haven't, as an organization, taken a position one way or the other on this particular project. And I'll say that again because it's important that be clear. We haven't, as an organization, taken a position yet. Because frankly, we as an organization have many, many more questions than we've had answers to date. The most recent action of the City Council was to take the proposition and they voted a resolution to declare the intent of the City Council to raise $17.3 million through general obligation bonds to support the project. The presentation that was made that evening did not take into account any cap on those dollars. It did not take into account at that moment in time the status of other outside funding sources. Subsequently, the city did get news that the Federal Budget Appropriation Act had been passed, the Omnibus Appropriation Act, and that had a $5 million plum, an earmark that was put into the appropriations bill by Senator Baldwin that helps fill some of that funding gap that exists. Tonight we want to talk in depth a little bit about not only that project, but we had the good fortune of sitting through a presentation this past week in Beloit. And the two gentlemen that I've asked to join us tonight are here to talk about the sports tourism proposal that's being put together by the Visit Beloit and its in its association, other associations. And we want to talk in depth about what that proposal is all about. We want to talk a bit about how all of these things come together and are in play at the same time. I want to express my disappointment, first and foremost, over the fact that we have been, as an organization, accused of being biased in terms of how we have put together our panels. And the fact of the matter is, after our last panel discussion with this topic, I enjoyed a conversation with two people as I stood up at the end of it who said, "You're incredibly biased in this direction And then I went over to that part of the room and I talked to two more people, and they told me that I was incredibly biased in the other direction. So I kind of came to the conclusion that I somehow fit in the middle there, and I must have done something right. So I appreciate you coming back and listening to us one more time as we talk about this project. My disappointment, again, goes to the fact that we invited 7 of the proponents of the Woodman Sports and Convention Center to be a participant in tonight's Academy session. And they all, for various reasons, declined. In fact, they suggested that if I had more questions, I could get those answers if I went on the city's website to the frequently asked questions area. And the conversation concluded with a thank you very much. So we did make the effort to invite, and that's all we can do. I can't compel them to be here. Tonight, though, I'm really honored to have join us first from Beloit, Matt Rosen, who is the Director of Sales and Servicing for Visit Beloit, and Celestino Ruffini, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Visit Beloit, and we'll be talking specifically about their project plans and the approach that they're taking to get the community involved in the conversation that will chart a course for the Beloit area. And there's some interesting parallels that we'll pursue. To my immediate right is Duffy Dillon. Duffy is a well-known attorney here in the community, and I tease him a little bit because perhaps he's better well-known for his efforts in putting together the youth sports complex on the east side. And he has been one of those faces that has had an amazing amount of energy dedicated to youth sports within the community. And he also is here tonight to offer some insights from his perspective of just what exactly the Woodman Sports and Convention Center proposal offers. And perhaps there's some alternative courses that can be taken to take us down the road. So with that, I want to say welcome and welcome, gentlemen. Glad to have you with us. Glad to have you with us. I want to start with you, Celestina, if you could. Give me a quick overview of the sports tourism proposal that's being talked about in Beloit. And in particular, focus in on those areas that may have some parallels with what's going on here. And
yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Rich. As Rich said, Celestino Ruffini, CEO of Visit Beloit, and we've been here in the Beloit region since 2015. You know, our organization, very similar, almost identical in nature to the Janesville area CVB that you're probably familiar with here. And our organization has been, proudly representing the city of Beloit since 1987. In particular, our organization serves 4 municipalities, city and town of Beloit. And then on the Illinois side, city of South Beloit and village of Rockton. We're in a unique position. We're one of only 3 tourism entities in Wisconsin that promote across state lines. And that collaboration between, in particular, Beloit and South Beloit has played major dividends for our community for a number of years. So where we are at in our endeavor to discuss youth sports in the community is simply step 1. We recently had a community conversation about 3 recommendations for a youth sports facility, of which we'll dive into tonight. But that conversation started in a room similar to this with a number of youth sport organization leaders, business stakeholders, people from the nonprofit sector, just really a community conversation. And it really started in Beloit about what are we doing to support the youth of our community? What are we doing to build a better destination for our next generation? And what do we need to focus on that will cover the needs of our youth in Beloit? This wasn't a conversation about what are the wants. It was about what are the gaps in our community that we need to focus on.
so as you took on that whole question of what are the gaps, you hired an outside firm to come in and do an inventory of existing facilities. And Matt, if you would kind of walk me through that process that you went through with this consultant to map out what are the existings and what other interest areas did you delve into as you started putting your plan together?
Yeah, so we hired Huddle Up Group, which is a national company. They're based in Arizona, but this is what they specialize in, is feasibility studies like this. And they came in and they did an audit of all of our youth sports facilities. So I worked with them and I took them to everything that we have in Beloit and South Beloit, in that area, to show them what we have available. So once they got that data, they compared that. They've done this same work in about 320 other cities across the country. So they compared our inventory against the inventory available in those other cities around the country. So then they're able to tell us where we rank on the facilities that we have available, and then that shows those gaps that Celestino was talking about. It shows where, if they were in our shoes, where they would invest the dollars in specific kinds of facilities that are either represented in the community based on the number of kids that are participating in that sport that need more access to those fields, or they'll say that facility that you have, if you improve it a little bit here and here, it will become a much more usable facility for tournaments.
You're in a very dynamic marketplace, not only in Beloit proper, but across this region. It's an extremely dynamic marketplace with changes happening constantly, and there's a lot of master planning that's going on in the region right now that I think is of particular note. There is a master planning process on recreation facilities that's going on in the city of Madison. There is a Dane County master plan underway that's looking at the creative reuse of the Dane County Fairgrounds, the expo facility, and the adjoining real estate associated with it. We have plans that we're obviously talking about here in Janesville. Sports Court 2 and 3 in Rockford is just a stone's throw down the road, and it's undergoing a transformation, as is the BMO Center in downtown Rockford. How did you blend all of this dynamic marketplace stuff into your planning?
So for our organization, data and research are paramount. We attempt to make as many savvy business decisions for the betterment of not only our organization, but our community. And that's an ongoing basis. So this study is a point in time reflection of where we're at. Predominantly, this study, not only the focus group, very similar to a group of this size here tonight, but the surveys we did really went after what are the most popular sports, what are the great things already happening, but in particular, what are the most underserved sports? And that's how the recommendations, at least in this study, were designed and developed. And really, the point we're at in our conversation is we have been working on this since really the last 7 months, 8 months. And this step, releasing our study and providing these recommendations, is simply the catalyst to continue the conversation. By no means are we looking at moving dirt or putting structure up, but we are at a point of engaging the community to continue the conversations about, are these truly the top recommendations that you are interested in and passionate in, and how are they complementary to your question, Rich? How are they complementary to everything going on throughout the Rock River region? And of which our consultants with Huddle Up Group were very clear in our community session recently that what's happening here in Janesville with the Woodman Center, what's happened in Rockford, what's happening throughout this entire region, we've taken into consideration, just as I would hope a project here in Janesville would do the same of anything happening in our neck of the woods.
Duffy, you have spent a lot of time looking at the various studies that have been done, the feasibility studies for the Woodman Center. And I think from a couple of sessions of the Academy ago, we kind of came to a conclusion that the snapshot in time of a feasibility study is good for that snapshot in time. Your thoughts at this moment about where you see the marketplace and where you see the marketplace changing and going?
Well, thanks for having me. when I hear the word feasibility study in this context, I think it's important to define what you're talking about with feasibility. Because when I think of it, was it feasible to operate the building once built in a way that's profitable and efficient and doesn't constitute a drain on the public coffers, basically. So that's what I think. When I read feasibility studies that were done by the consultants that came through Janesville, and I've read all the studies, and sort of like what you have done, I think, the Janesville Area Convention and Visitors Bureau, I may have the V and C mixed up on that, but that entity commissioned a study in 2019 about we need a new ice arena, basically what's feasible around here. What will this community support? And that study involved, we're going to survey local sports groups and local constituents, much like what your feasibility consultant, I think, did. But in Janesville, that study, I think the results show, and I think the consultant acknowledged, the respondents were heavily overweighted to people who are in the current hockey program or current ice arena users. That's not surprising. When the survey was being done, I was the president of Janesville Youth Baseball and Softball Association at the time, and the consultant reached out to us and said, "Can we use your email list? Will you let your people know this survey is going on? We want to know from the community what's going on." And so, of course, we flipped that out to our user groups or our people, and we probably had an email list of 7,000 people at the time, so we sent it out to them. And the hockey program did too, and I'm friends with all these youth sports groups around here. So I know what they did, but you can look at the results and you can see the standard respondent is somebody who is traveling 10 to 20 times a year outside of Janesville for travel for a youth sports event. That's a tournament team respondent parent, basically. The typical respondent is age 35 to 45. That's right in the sweet spot of people who have kids in that age that are playing sports. And the vast majority of the respondents said, we need a new ice arena because our ice arena is run down and we travel for hockey and that sort of thing. So it's not a surprise to anybody that the responses come primarily from the hockey program. But what I didn't see in this feasibility study, what I saw in the feasibility study for Janesville was the consultant recognized that there was an overweighting from that constituency, and then said normally we might discount that, but we think the response is so strong that we should still put some weight on it. And what I should note about myself is that I'm a trial lawyer, and so I'm trained to look at opinions from experts in cases that people are, plaintiff or defendant against me is bringing an expert report against me and saying, I want your client to pay me money based on this opinion, or I want to take money from you based on this opinion. And so I'm trained to scrutinize that. So the first thing I do is scrutinize this report and go, well, wait a minute. The results are overweighted and they're coming from the hockey program. Understandable it's coming from the hockey program, but let's understand that's where those responses are coming from. And then the second thing about feasibility studies is, at least in the Janesville examples, the feasibility study is talking about different things. First they talk about, well, what facilities do you need? And I think from a municipal perspective, we have an ice arena here in town. We should replace the ice arena. It's 50 years old, it's run down, we need a new one. There's no sense in extending it. And they were talking about doing it 10 years ago, and I was in favor of it then. So I'm still in favor of it. The costs have gone up, but I still think we should replace it. What I have caught in the feasibility study, if you go through the history in Janesville, first it was a feasibility study on the ice arena only. And then the first consultant said, you can do this, and they threw some numbers at it that were not supported by anything. And then the city had a second consultant come in. I think Johnson was the name of the consultant.
Yep.
And the Johnson study was also in 2019, and they said, the first consultant really didn't look at things very closely. Let us look at some stuff. But both of those consultants said, if you want to run an ice arena, you have to run it in Janesville. You have to run it as like a public park. You have to run it for the locals to use. It's got to be something that the locals use and make the most use out of. And that was fine. That was 2019. That was pre-COVID, and I was participating in site locations and stuff like that, and I was all on board with everything. And then what happened post-COVID in this most recent discussion is we now have a convention center added to this. And we have a new consultant who has thrown another pro forma, is what we call it, at the building. So the building is proposed to be a 3-sheet facility, 2-sheet ice arena, and one equivalent of a sheet, which has turf. But the consultants say, well, what's this going to cost us to operate year to year? Because currently the ice arena operates at a loss. The city has to allocate certain salaries to it. So, okay, here's our Parks and Recs people, because it's city-owned and city-run. and they run it with city staff who run Parks and Rec. So they don't just run the ice arena, they run other things. So let's say, well, our Parks and Rec department has $200,000 of salary in it. We're going to give the ice arena X amount of cost for that. And so they have some costs that they put on that budget. But I'm also an accountant, so I look at that and I kind of track with all that stuff. And so I go, well, when I look at the pro forma, I look at the end of the day, what's it going to do? Is it going to make money or lose money? It's probably going to lose money. But the question is not, is it going to lose money? Because I'm okay with it losing money. The question is, how much is it going to lose? And so I think that the consultants that have been involved with Janesville for feasibility, they say the project is feasible, but when they say what you're going to have to do to make it maintain that $50,000 a year subsidy, the things that they say the facility is capable of, in my lived experience, it is not capable of it, because they're talking about bringing in a host of national tournaments and other things that I, in my lived experience here in Janesville, having been a part of helping build the sports complex and running that capital campaign and then running Janesville Youth Baseball and Softball for many years with a lot of really dedicated people, we had a really hard time attracting people to come here. Why? Because we have a sports core down in Rockford and we have competition. So that's going to exist here and everywhere else. And so when the feasibility studies talk about the feasibility of how it's going to be operated after it is built, my own personal opinion is that is largely not a plan. It's not based on experience. It is hope, and it is numbers that have been thrown into a spreadsheet to come to a number. And I am concerned. I hope to God that they make that and they are successful in that. But I am concerned that they will not. And I have experience with JPAC and other places where they didn't, and it was a struggle. And so as a citizen, I'm just sort of saying, I think these are issues that should be considered before the city pulls a trigger on whether it's 20 million or 30 or 40 or 50 million. Once you build it, you should know if you're going to lose 50,000 a year, that's one thing. If you're going to lose $1 million a year, that's totally something different, and you need to know what that looks like before you dive into the deep end of the pool.
So very true, and in my professional career, I've probably commissioned 75, 80 feasibility studies for various and sundry projects, and I can only think of one that ever came back that was different than what I had told the consultant I wanted. And that's just the reality of it. The real meat and potatoes of what you need to make something plausible, my opinion, and I'm curious your opinions as well, is you need that operations plan. And that has to be based on reality, because that's where the rubber meets the road. Am I dismissing maybe too quickly the $50 per $150,000 house as the initial capital cost, and in my focus on the operational cost? Duffy, your thoughts?
No, I mean, I generally speaking, I don't know how you can determine what the fiscal impact is to the taxpayer until you know what it's reasonably going to do. And so you are, if you built Miller Park here in Janesville, you would not reasonably expect you're going to land a Major League Baseball team to come here. So, one of the points I made in a Facebook post is when we are building a sports facility, the unique aspects of that sports facility are the location. So I've gone to probably 500 kids' baseball games, and probably 250 of those are travel games, and I've traveled a lot of the country. I've gone to Jonesboro, Arkansas for a World Series. I've gone to Ohio and Kentucky and many other places for some of these facilities. And you guys, in your report, your consultant did something that Janesville's didn't do, which is they did a census of your city and what you have and what you may benefit from adding, and said, well, here's what the soccer community needs more fields, and other people need more fields, and the focus is on what could serve the community. And I agree with that. That's exactly what consultants should do. But when they go further and they say, well, and once you build it, they will come, I'm on that side of it, and I've tried to bring them to come, and they don't. I just have serious doubts that they will come. And your consultant is saying specifically, well, Visit Beloit should, once this place is built, should preserve for itself most favored nation status when it comes to scheduling that place, so that you guys could then take it and go nationwide and bring in national events, that sort of thing. If that's what you choose to do, wonderful, more power to you. What I'm looking for in Janesville is what is the plan for how we're going to operate this? And all I have seen in Janesville is we're going to hire somebody else to come in and operate this for the city. And if you don't know who that is, or what they're going to do, or how they're going to bring people to town, or what they're going to do to market it, or how they're going to spend money on it, that kind of thing, or where they're going to get the money to spend on that, I don't know I represent businesses all day, every day. I'm going to be in a 2-day board meeting for one of my clients over the next 2 days, United Alloy, and there is no way that any business I represent would make a decision to build a brand new production facility without knowing how they're going to run it. So I would agree. Build a new ice arena and you know what that's gonna be, and there might be extra cost for that. When you say we're gonna bolt on a convention center, and when you say we don't know how we're gonna staff it and it's something we've never run before, I think you owe the city or the citizens an explanation for what your plan is so that everybody can ballpark. If they think they're gonna lose $50,000 and they're right, I would love it. Build it, prove it, but build it. But if they're wrong, I think that there's been a lack of attention paid to those issues. I don't want to say anybody's been dismissive of that, but I think it really needs a lot more attention than it's been given so far.
We have asked for a business plan multiple times, and we've not seen that business plan. In your planning in Beloit, I know you're in the early stages, but from my conversations with you, I trust the sensitivity you have to the whole concept of once it's built, will they come? And how efficient, how effective, how cost effective can you be in operating it? That is part of your plan, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that management, as you mentioned, is it's more than $1 million question, because we're one day going to have to answer that ourselves, and there's a very much a pull and push scenario you get into with, if you do hire a third-party management firm, what are they on the hook for? And in most cases, you're paying them above and beyond what you would ever normally expect to pay, especially if it's a large facility. So granted, they bring in a level of expertise to manage that facility that maybe you couldn't find locally, but it's a crucial decision that we'll have to cross that road on. And definitely sooner than later.
Question out of the audience. Sun Prairie and Verona have probably two of the better operated programs in the state for ice facilities. When you were doing your planning, when you asked your consultant to take a look at the environment around the marketplace, were those two programs taken into account? And frankly, for you, Duffy, are those two programs from your analysis models that we ought to be looking at of being successful ventures in a community with a balanced budget, as they would say?
I'll respond first with all hockey programs and all major hockey facilities in the state of Wisconsin and in the Midwest were considered within our project. But I do want to take a moment to state that for us in Beloit, hockey is not the top recommendation. So you maybe thought that this was going to be a Janesville Beloit kind of thing, but hockey is not our top recommendation. So actually a flat field complex is there's a major void of that in the state of Wisconsin, and in particular this region. For our youth and our community in Beloit, the access and ability to get on flat fields is paramount. So a combination of both outdoor and indoor fields is our top recommendation.
For the benefit of the audience, define a flat field.
Commonly a soccer field, anything you can.
Lacrosse, soccer, football.
Softball,
there's non-traditional
baseball.
sports.
Softball, baseball too, could be.
But typically those are diamond complexes.
Yes.
So we already have we have an 11-field diamond complex, and that's also one of the recommendations is to improve that facility. Mm-hmm. But specifically they were targeting with this soccer because that is a highly underrepresented sport in Beloit. The amount of facilities, the number of kids that are playing it are far outweighing the number of facilities that are available. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the kids are having to leave the area and they're having to go to Rockford and other places. But then that creates transportation issues for a lot of the families trying to get their kids down there to have access to those fields. And then there's compression because there's a lot of kids in Rockford playing as well. So there was a lot of desire in our community from the feedback they got in their survey for access to flat fields.
But hockey is number two, whether a new or renovated facility, and then as Matt mentioned, renovations and expansion to our current sports complex, the YMCA Sports Complex, which is an amazing complex that we're already competing for national tournaments on, but obviously booked heavily with regional tournaments. So those are the top three recommendations. But yes, to your point, Sun Prairie and Verona and every hockey facility or ice facility in the state was considered.
Well, from my perspective, I think at least to the extent that I've read the reports, the consultants do identify, here's where all these other facilities are. I think to some degree the Janesville consultants they say, well, here's where they are, and if you build this one, you will be standing alone, and it begs the question, well, aren't you consulting with other places suggesting that they build places too? It's not like Rockford doesn't have a place. It's not like Beloit's not thinking about building a place. If we build a 2-sheet ice arena and then Beloit turns around and builds one in a couple of years, we probably are losing some of the demand that our feasibility study is counting on. So I mean, you don't operate in a vacuum on any of these things, but the other thing I think about from an operational perspective is this. If you read the business plan for just the ice arena from 2019 for the second consultant, which I have on my screen, they say, quote, part of the challenge of developing new sports complexes is assessing how to best operate, manage, and market them, and what methods could increase the operational efficiencies. And an important first step to establishing an effective management strategy is to select an appropriate operating model for this facility. And they go on to say for the Janesville facility, they are recommending a public model, which is that the city owns it, the city operates it, it's the city's own building. But my experience in the city of Janesville is, and one of my experiences with Janesville Youth Baseball and Softball was, raise your hand if you know about Dawson Fields, if you've ever heard of it. So Dawson Fields is the city's built 4-field adult softball complex that's right across the street from the ice arena. And it was built in 1982. And for a baseball and softball facility, it has fantastic bones. Fantastic bones. But it has not been used very well, or the interest has waned over its existence. And so from, say, 2005 to 2015, the adult leagues start to not have as much participation. Part of that's because Back of the Yards has a field, and they started running adult leagues there, and so they started competing with the city. Well, anyway, that's all a preface to tell you. The city several years ago put out a request for bids for third parties to come in and run Dawson Field for them because they don't want to run it anymore. And I'm one of the people that wrote proposals for 2 years in a row for JYBSA to come in and run that place. And what we said was, we can't run it yet because you got to renovate it because it's not safe to play at, first of all. So you got to put in $50,000 a field to fix it up. And then we'll come in and run it, but we're just going to run our ordinary programming, and we don't know where it's going to go, but we will run it for practices and games, and we will bring more youth activity down there and that kind of stuff. The point of that all being, there's not a facility in Janesville right now that is operated by the city of Janesville other than the ice arena, and they're trying to find somebody else to run it for them with this next version. So the sports complex was built with city funding, for sure, but the model out there is JYBSA runs it, or Rock Soccer runs it, or somebody else is running programming out there. So somebody somewhere in the mix has to run programming, and if the city thinks that, in my view, if the city thinks that they will just build a building, yes, Janesville Youth Hockey will go out there because they need a place to play. Anybody else who needs it for ice skating will go out there because they need a place to do it. But if they're talking about other programming, if they're talking about use of the sports fields or anything else like that, somebody's got to generate the interest. Somebody has to schedule it. Somebody has to bring the teams there. Somebody has to run those programs. That is the local sports programming people. And every one of these feasibility studies that I see talks about, is it feasible to build the building? But they don't talk too much about who will the primary users be, how often will they use it, and so on and so forth. So I think that's, again, that gets back to my core concern, which is you have to address those things to know up front. Is this going to be a community asset, or is this a tournament venue for other people to come in and use? And how's it going to function when after you've had it built?
And that raises the question of the finite size of the market out there. There are only so many national tournaments that are available. There's only so many regional tournaments that are available. And to a certain extent, it's a bit of a zero-sum game. If I pick up a new tournament in Janesville, or I pick up a new tournament in Beloit, I'm taking it in all likelihood from some other community that has already had that tournament established in that area. Is that a fair observation, Duffy, from your experience?
Well, from my experience, Janesville Youth Baseball and Softball has occasionally hosted regional tournaments. So Janesville Youth Baseball and Softball is a member of the Babe Ruth League and the Cal Ripken League. So if anybody's seen the Little League World Series on TV, that's a different umbrella organization, but we're in the Cal Ripken League, which is a competitor organization. And we have, every few years, hosted what they call the Ohio Valley Regional. So the local leagues play in a state tournament, then they go to the Ohio Valley Regional. Then if they win the Ohio Valley Regional, they go to a World Series. And my kids have played in the Ohio Valley Regional probably both of them. I've probably been to 14 Ohio Valley Regionals, and I've been to one World Series. And here locally, we have hosted Ohio Valley Regionals. But every time we host an Ohio Valley Regional, we have to pay for the privilege of hosting the regional. So we have to pay the national organization. I don't remember if it was it was a reasonable number. It was $5,000 maybe a tournament. I'd have to look it up. But every time we did that, we had to estimate, well, what are we going to generate for revenue? Are we going to break even or not? So when I see, well, like in Janesville, for example, because they've done a pro forma and they have, well, here we're going to run this venue. But in order to make this venue work, we need to have 16 to 20 hockey tournaments over the winter. And I say to myself, well, I don't think the Janesville youth hockey teams will want to play in that many tournaments here locally because they want to travel. Because that was our experience at JYBSA. We made our teams have 2 tournaments per age level at our place. And we did that because we were cost conscious and we wanted to make it low cost for our participants. But even the people who are concerned about cost would say, this is a travel team. I want to go to up north. I want to go other places. So I don't want to play all my tournaments here. So when you see these feasibility studies say, well, we're going to have all these tournaments here, it begs the question for me, who's going to do the marketing? Who's going to get them here? And when they, in the feasibility study and the pro formas, they say, well, like for example, Janesville will host tournaments here, and they will rent out the facility for $6,000 a weekend to people who are hosting hockey tournaments. Well, if you do that times, I did some numbers. I think if you do it for like 4 months or something, you raise like 360. Oh no, if you do that for 52 weeks a year. So if you host tournaments every week for 52 weeks a year at $6,000 a pop, it's only $365,000 in revenue. So where are you going to get the rest of your revenue? In my judgment, you got to get the core use out of local people. But then that raises the question for me, and I know I'm droning on, but it raises the question for me of, well, how are you going to raise money from that local use? So I like to go to the parks. I walk my dogs all the time through Riverside and other places. So when the city spends money on a park and it's free and open, everybody can use it. It's a one-time investment. Mm-hmm. What our feasibility study is talking about is in the pro forma is, well, we will have user fees. So that means if you and I want to go there, we have to pay $10 to go in there every time. So there's a cost to go there. And when there's a cost to go there, what happens with at least my program, JYBSA, is, well, if you've got this great facility, we want to run it for indoor practice in the wintertime, but there's other facilities. So if you want to charge us $100 for an hour of sport field time, we'll go someplace else. Mm-hmm. So there's all that kind of competition, and at least I think I know what the local sports market is for the nonprofit groups, and I don't see them having enough demand, organizational capacity, or financial wherewithal to really afford what I think is ultimately going to be the cost to be here. And so in Janesville anyway, I'm concerned that we're building a facility that will have less use than is predicted. And to the extent that they want to recruit, when they do a pro forma on, well, we'll host all these tournaments, what they don't do is they say, well, to host 10 national tournaments, there is something, Rich, where, like in the softball arena in particular, you can find a national tournament every weekend somewhere. So national doesn't always mean national, but if we're talking national on the scale of we're bringing in teams from all over the country, and it's something, they want competition, they want the fiercest competition they can find, they want the best referees they can find, they want the best organization they can find. You need to have a professional tournament operation running that place. And if you're going to do that, and if you're going to bring that kind of a tournament in that's through a national sanctioned body, to my understanding anyway, you might have to pay $10, $15, $20, $30,000 to bring that tournament here, and that cost is not baked into the Janesville pro forma either. Yeah. So I say I have questions. Put it down.
Let's go to basics. Visit Beloit is a unique organization in as much as you cross state lines. What is your funding structure? How does that work?
Yeah, so the majority of our funding, very similar to how JACVB works, the majority of our funding comes from room tax collections. In the city of Beloit, it's an 8% room tax. So every hotel stay is charged that additional 8% on top of sales tax. Of the 8%, the city of Beloit passes through 80% of that to us at Visit Beloit. So the majority of our funding does come from room tax as a tourism entity, and outside of that, grants, private revenue that we raise. But our total budget for 2023 is around $1.2 million.
It's very premature, I'm guessing, to try and nail down funding sources for the sports tourism project that you're about. But I'm guessing you probably had conversations with the city of Beloit, with South Beloit and others about potential buy-in. What's the general scheme that you're approaching this from a financing perspective?
So many of the mechanisms, public financing mechanisms in Wisconsin are very difficult to obtain for projects like this, whether it be sales tax, room tax, things that don't even exist here, in particular tourism improvement districts. Those aren't options. Public financing at this point in time, not to say that can't happen, but that's not at the table, nor have we had those conversations with our municipalities.
I'll interject. In my days on city council, I can remember a conversation where I asked the question, is this a project that could be supported by revenue bonds? And the answer that I got back from the consultant who was in the room at the time was, not in our lifetime. So there are limitations, and I would echo the limitations that you're talking about. So how do you approach funding something like this? Because that's got to be in that long range picture of how you take this from idea conception to reality.
Right now, it's all based on, so we're in a process where individuals that attended our session could request the proposal and sort of pour through it, look at the top recommendations, and we're in a 30-day window right now where we continue to follow up with each of those people on a weekly basis to ask them what are they interested in and what are they doing to move the needle forward on any of the recommendations. As a stakeholder group, we reconvene at the beginning of February to begin to filter through the recommendations, and then at that point is when we'll start to talk about financing. But whether it's financing, location, management, any of those topics, we haven't even crossed that bridge yet.
Before we leave that area of the bridge, to what extent have you or your consultants spent time with your user groups to get a sense and feel for their sensitivity to expense, to cost? If in fact you're going to be driving this thing with user fees.
As Celestino said, this is just step one. The focus of this was not about financing it yet, because we don't even know what the it is. Once that is determined, we're following much in the footsteps of our friends up in Appleton, who did a project up there, who wound up becoming the Champion Center, which is an ICE facility. But we're following in their footsteps in the sense that they hired Huddle Up Group first step and had this type of feasibility study done. Then they had two more studies done later. One focused on operational expenses and how to make funding work, and then they did another one right before they actually went to put the shovel in the ground. So right now we are just finding out what the taste in the community is. What do they want to go? Is there anything that jumps off the page to the community as a whole? And if we get that identified, then we go back and we say, okay, we know what the it is now, and how do we fund that? How do we make that a reality?
Have you had any conversations with the city of Beloit about who could potentially be owner, operator, running at any of these facilities, or is it way too premature for that conversation?
Yeah. So
because I know as I look through the inventory, there's a host of individual pieces that are run by a variety of different organizations.
Yeah, as far as the city of Beloit goes, we had 2 city councilors and 4 city staff at the presentation, and we'll be following up with each of them within the month. So that's as far as the conversations went. We do, at least at Visit Beloit, the city manager, economic development director, and a city councilor all serve on our board, so they're all privy on a bi-monthly basis to updates on things too.
Okay. It's too early probably for you to pinpoint who is going to be the operator in Janesville. Duffy, my understanding is the proposal as it sits today would have the city of Janesville be the owner and the operator. And from that experience, I also know that Janesville's golf courses are operated by a private vendor on a fee-for-service basis. Have you made any observations about which model is more effective, more efficient?
Well, the comment I made in a post not long ago, well, and I want to state, you guys are trying to catch up, in my judgment. I mean, we have the sports complex here in Janesville, and you have your baseball fields, but you don't have the equivalent of the flat fields that we have, I don't think, in one spot.
No.
And when our facility was built, I did a kind of a survey around the state, and it was 10 years ago, but when we were raising the money for the sports complex, I sort of said, once this is built, there's not going to be another facility around the state that has this kind of mix of flat fields, baseball fields, we have something unique in Janesville, something really, really neat. But getting back to your question, on the operational model, I'm not aware of the city operating any recreational facility at a profit, ever. Now, I could be wrong about that, but there's a reason they don't operate it as a profit. They're not trying to make money on the backs of the citizens that they operate these facilities for. They're creating Dawson for public benefit. They're creating other things for public benefit, but they're not trying to tell the public, well, we're going to now operate this on a for-profit basis, or at least we're not trying to make revenue from our operations or make profit from our operations to offset the costs that we will have to carry this thing going forward. And I don't have any great opinions about how they will operate this year. What I will note is the funding source is critical. So that's what I have been asking the city. So when my first discussion with the city, it was kind of what Rich just asked. I was asking Jennifer Petrozzello in 2019, I said, we want to build this ice arena. You're currently operating a $50,000 a year subsidy. How are you going to fund this? Because you're going to have a new building, you're going to have more operations, you're going to need more people. You're going to do. So what's the city's plan? Are you going to dip into general revenues? Can you tax? I didn't know. I said, can you tax for this? What are you thinking about doing? And the answer is kind of what you said. We're very constrained on what we do. And so the Fox River, or Fox, what is that entity called?
Fox City CVB.
So Fox City CVB, but they formed a sports tourism entity that I think now can tax to raise. They capture
the Fox City CVB prior to the Champions Center was a 6% room tax. Mm-hmm. So simultaneously to doing the Champions Center, they did the Exhibition Center in downtown Appleton. So they, in their case, the Fox City CVB represents 19 communities. They had to go to all 19 and say, we not only want to raise room tax by 2%, but they wanted to utilize the Expo tax district rules to go an additional 2% to raise for a convention center. So they went to 19 municipalities. Some didn't even have room tax on the books. They got all 19 to either adopt or raise room tax, not only from the 6 to 8, but 8 to 10. And they did the Champion Center and the Expo Center at the same time to make that happen. But that additional 2% beyond 8 has to be strictly for a convention center. There's very strict parameters on how to make that happen. And, in our case, obviously, just looking at sports, if we wanted to use room tax, we would have to slice and dice what's already happening, which could happen, but that would be a conversation between us and the city to make happen.
The Fox Cities project, did that require a change to state law in order to form that particular district, or was it simply an act where the cities got together and said, we will form a consortium and make something happen on a regional basis?
Absolutely. It was after a similar session that Huddle Up Group did with us, that one of the municipalities said, hey, we think we've got a spot that this project could happen. If you can work on the financing side and let's figure out the management side, it all came together. But it just took all 19 getting on board to raise from 6 to 8% room tax to make the Champion Center happen. And then additionally, they went to 10, an additional 2% to make the Expo.
That's an intriguing approach to funding, and it's also intriguing to me that it required municipalities to actually work together.
Absolutely.
And in that process of working together, I'm suspecting that they probably avoided a lot of potential duplication, which in turn would save some taxpayer dollars. Interesting model. Let me go back to some of the questions from the audience as we run through this. This was directed to you, Duffy. What is the expected primary use and proximity of the third sheet turf that's being planned in the facility? And I'm not sure that that's one you can answer.
I've scoured the materials and they don't say what it is.
Yeah.
It's a multi-use area that they will. I don't necessarily fault them for that. For JYBSA, when we decided to move, for those of you who are familiar with Janesville, we used to have a 4-field complex off of Milton Avenue, And then we started 2 fields at the sports complex. We found out it was hard to manage 2 facilities, and so we finally said, okay, and we wanted to build fields with lights for baseball. So we finally said, okay, we're going to move. We're finally going to accept the city's offer because the sports complex was dedicated in the mid-90s. And so we finally took up the offer about 15 years later. And we built 4 softball fields, flex fields. And we said, well, we don't even know what we're going to do with them, really. I mean, we had never run girls softball. We hadn't run younger leagues, but we had an idea. We said, well, we will try to run girls softball. We will try to run younger kids. We'll have some kind of idea for what we'll do. It turned out that building those extra fields, those are the most valued fields they have out there. They're the most heavily used. They're the youngest kids use them. So JYBSA would never regret building it, but we had aspirations for what we would do with it. With this facility, I don't think they have a plan or even aspirations other than it's extra flex space that maybe all the groups local sports groups would want to use because it's indoor turf facility. But I can tell you I've been to other indoor turf facilities in the summer. I've got a picture of myself sitting inside an indoor turf facility in the summertime, and it's just me. Because it's wide open, but I've I've gone to Crown Point, Indiana, and they've got this huge, beautiful facility. I don't know what they spent, but it was upwards of $50, $75 million on it. And they've got a dome facility, and because of my involvement with the sports complex and other places, I'm a facilities dork. So when I travel other places, I'm like, I want to see what they've got, because maybe I'm going to want it. And I see this dome, and I think, wow, it's cool and everything else, but there's nobody in there. So
it was interesting in looking through the sports tourism venue audit that your consultant did take a hard look at the cost of some of the facilities that were being proposed. And they did make an extensive proposal of using domed facilities that are significantly less costly with a similar life expectancy of a different type of construction. Do either of you have any experience, or Duffy, do you have any experience with that type of approach to facilities?
So the recommendation that they made was that the flat field facility didn't only need outdoor fields. In order for it to meet the needs of the community, it needed to have at least one having that indoor capacity because of the winter time for soccer. There was just nowhere to play indoor soccer was the primary driver for that. But by having that indoor facility, it also opens up opportunities to have much more economic driving opportunities into those shoulder seasons, into the seasons when it's not so great outside for soccer in Wisconsin. But you have an opportunity to still get those tournaments in because you have the indoor field, at least one in their recommendation. And they suggested the bubble dome as the most cost-effective way to do that without having to invest in the brick and mortar of actually building a full indoor complex facility there. Again, our group has not got to a point where we know if that's how we would go. They just built that into that recommendation as the most cost-effective way to hit their ultimate suggestion, which is to include indoor space, at least one field.
Interesting. I just noted the cost differential in that particular approach was rather substantial, and it caught my eye. A question I'm going to toss at you, Duffy. If the new ice arena and supporting facilities were debt-free from day one of operation, how could it be self-sustaining? And if so, how much money could it potentially make under the business plan as we know it today?
I mean, if you're asking me personally, if I think I don't know. Personally, I don't have the experience to tell you because I haven't run an ice arena and I haven't run these facilities. But right now, the plan is to lose $50,000 a year on it and maintain. That's the current subsidy that the city puts towards the existing ice arena, and so that's their bogey that they're trying to hit. But you could spend hours scouring their pro formas, and what you would find is it's just aspirational. We have this cost, and so we got to plug to this cost, and so to plug to this cost. I have an accountant friend. Both of us went to Notre Dame. Both of us have accounting degrees from Notre Dame, and we were talking about this project not long ago. And I was talking about this because this is one of my interests, and so I just kind of was going off. But said, and she said, well, yeah, and every accountant knows if we are as an accountant asked by a business owner, well, we can tell you what it's going to cost. Well, can I cover it? Well, I can always fill in the revenue lines to say that you're going to cover it, but that doesn't mean you're actually going to bring in the revenue. And so right now, that's where I would say that we stand with the City of Janesville feasibility studies. Is we have a feasibility study that says we're going to assume that's going to cost you about $1.2 to $1.5 million a year to operate. That's not even a solid estimate because they could go to other facilities and go, what's it costing you to operate this place right here? And they didn't do that. Instead, what they said is, we'll take the existing cost for the ice arena that you have now, and we will basically multiply that, because you're going to build, the facility is going to be bigger, so we'll just kind of do pro rata, we'll expand this, so your costs will be higher, but you're going to need more staff for things that they don't explain what they'll be doing, other than, well, you need a full-time general manager, you need a couple marketing people. And one thing I should note is that the first feasibility consultant said, I think you need about 11 and a half FTE, full-time equivalent personnel to run the facility, and when it was a 2-sheet ice arena. The latest feasibility study has cut that down to 7.5, I think,
Yes.
and said, well, we will rent this out to somebody else. And I just go as an accountant and a trial lawyer going, well, just tell me why you think that's going to work, and they don't explain it. And so if they don't explain it, and they've got consultants looking at it saying this is how it's going to work, I don't think they have an explanation. I certainly don't have one either.
Mm-hmm. Are there lessons that can be learned from what's going on in Janesville that you'll apply to your Beloit project and proposal?
Well, I was thinking back to how the conversation started on, I wasn't aware that Janesville had done an ice study a number of years ago. Coincidentally, in Beloit, there was an ice-specific study years ago as well. And, I think the thing that has changed since that study was done to where we're at today is we're looking at this as a much more grassroots effort. In Beloit, we're a smaller community by population. We're a smaller community by business size. And everything, the intent of the group has been, what are we doing for the youth of our community? The facility has to obviously be net zero or profitable. And so that's where the tourism focus has come in to what is the use of the facility when locals aren't using the facility. But, I would say the takeaway is that the way we're moving forward with our project, at least here in these first stages, is just really different than how the project got off the ground here in Janesville. It is all about the youth of our community. It's about what are we doing to meet their needs? What can we do from a tourism perspective to help bring in additional revenue, and sort of allowing the public to lead the conversation. We're sort of the shepherd of the sheep and trying to just find what is the passion and interest of the community and what can we do to help move that needle forward.
One of the specific reasons why I thought it was so important to have you at the table tonight is the approach that you're using and the focus that you're placing on community input. And that may be the distinct difference between these two separate projects, is you have truly tried to involve community, truly tried to involve user groups at the front end.
Yeah, and in many ways, I mean, you started this conversation talking about the Rock River region and all the projects happening. In many ways, sports tourism, of all types of tourism, sports tourism is growing the fastest. There is indeed what can be perceived as an arms race of facilities, not only in the state, but across the country. Quite frankly, in Beloit, we're going to be patient. We would love to see something happen tomorrow, but this is a multi-year process that we are just in the first few weeks on. And we get things done in Beloit. It doesn't always happen overnight, but when we come together as a community to make something happen, we're going to work at it and we're going to do our best.
And I'll add to that too, the sweet spot that we're trying to find is a number of the people that came to us that this started before we were even involved. It was a community group that had started having conversations about what the future of sports was. But their primary concern is, like Celestino said a couple times, is the youth of Beloit, getting them access to facilities that they may not already have access to, that they could get in other cities. And so when we came on board, it was how do we find that spot to have that access for local kids, but also generate economic impact on the weekends with tournaments. And again, referencing our friends in Appleton, what they did with that facility, they built that out, what they did, not for the tournament kids. They built the front of that because they wanted kids in their area, in those 19 communities, to walk up to that facility and be like, I'm walking into something that's amazing, and it's ours. Like, this is our facility. And that's why they built the kind of the front to give those kids that. And their hockey numbers went through the roof. Their figure skating numbers went through the roof. And they saw an impact in the number of kids participating just because they built something that was a pride piece for that area and that community. And I think we're using that as part of driving ours, is making sure local kids have something to be proud in, but that we can also generate some economic impact on the weekend.
What do you mean when you say it went through the roof?
I don't know the exact numbers offhand. I know that they told us, though, that there was concern there that a lot of the other facilities, skating facilities, were going to have to shut down, and they actually had numbers go up from where they were before the Champion Center opened. So they didn't close the other facilities. They actually were maxing out those facilities more than they were prior to the Champion Center, and the Champion Center was hitting all of their numbers on ice as well.
One of the interesting things in your study was a review by the consultant of the numbers of participants in various sporting activities that youth are prone to be a part of. And the numbers were kind of telling. I think the top of the list for the greatest participation, the greatest dollar generated, was something that took my breath away a little bit, because I hadn't really thought about it at all, and it hasn't been included in any of the proposals that I've seen here or anywhere else, and that's cheerleading and tumbling. Wow. And nobody's planning for any of those things, so it's interesting. Get back to some of these questions, Duffy. We talked earlier about the fact that on a $150,000 home, an average home, it's roughly $55 per year to support the capital side of this. And I think that's probably the least important number from a philosophical perspective. The real cost is the operation of the facility. At least that used to be the formula that I lived with when I was building facilities. It's what it's going to cost me over 20 years to operate it, as opposed to what it cost me to initially build it. Based on the numbers, have you seen it? And based on your own accounting and analytical abilities, what would you propose differently than perhaps what's been laid out on the table here in Janesville?
I'm gonna try to not avoid the lawyer thing and take 20 minutes to answer that question. Number one, I would pare the building back. I don't know that I am convinced that the convention center space is needed. I'm a friend of Christine Rebout. I know she mentioned to the city council that there's a list of conventions that we've had to turn away. I would ask her and her organization to identify who those folks are to the extent that she can, so the city can at least know what are the opportunities we're missing out on from convention space, that sort of thing. If it's needed, I would evaluate that separately and say, well, is this the location, that kind of thing. That's the first thing. Second thing is, I would not put it at the mall. I would put it downtown. I would condemn the Marling property, which I think I don't know this for a fact, but I think that the property is basically not used other than for storage. I think it needs to be redeveloped. I think it's got 5-6 acres down there. I would condemn it. I would pay whatever it takes to get that land from them, and I would put it there. The reason I say that is because, in my experience, there's been a lot of talk about the Janesville facility. We want to put it at the Janesville Mall because it will revitalize Milton Avenue and it will help revitalize the mall. Well, call me a skeptic. You all live in town or you know it, so you know if it's going to work or not. You have your own opinions. But in my experience, when we put the sports complex is a fantastic facility. It is on par with anything else we have in the state. So I'm here to tell you that. I can testify to that. But it is inconvenient. It is very convenient for me because I live 2 minutes from the sports complex. I live on Skyview Drive, so I can bolt to the sports complex. So my point to the community has been, if I have 2 kids that play out there 40 games a year, that's 80 minutes for me to go back and forth. If you're on the west side of town, it's 30 minutes every time you go back and forth. So the time and the effort and where you locate these facilities matters to whether and to what extent your local people are going to use it. And so to me, I don't think Milton Avenue is convenient for most people. I think downtown is most convenient for most people. I think the focus of any facility like this should be, are the citizens that are funding it going to use it? So I think it's got to be maximally used. I think that means located in a different spot. And I would pare back the cost. So, and I was really intrigued when I saw the cost of a dome facility, because I said, wait a minute. Because I've been in these facilities, but I'm like, well, wait a minute. If it's $2.5 to $3 million to put a dome over like 3 sheets of ice, then we can do the same thing here. So you could build a dome for $3 million or whatever.
With a 30-year life.
With a 30-year life, you'd have to replace it in 30 years, but you could replace it. And then if you did that here, if you said, well, I can get a 3-rink, or the size of a 3-rink facility under a dome, the dome's going to cost me $5 million, let's say. It's $15 million for the ice equipment. Well, you have the equivalent facility for $20 million, not 50. And I do think it's important to save money on the front end, and then operationally over the years, you're going to have a subsidy for this. And so the bigger the building you have, and the more maintenance you have, and the more things you got to do to maintain that facility, the more it's going to cost. And so my concern is really that if you don't figure out what that cost, if you don't minimize so JYBSA, we have this beautiful facility, but we are constantly, I'm not on the board anymore, but when I was on the board, we were constantly aware, we're going to have deferred maintenance out here. We have fields that we're going to have to fix. We have nets we're going to have to replace. We have other things we're going to have to do. So the bigger the building is and the more expensive it is, the more you're going to have to spend on that kind of thing over time. And I don't see anything built in. I mean, I do see them building in reserve in year 10, but they're basically talking about we're going to lose money for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and then we'll start contributing to a reserve, but we're still losing money. Where's that reserve coming from? If you're not net profit, if you're not making profit, you're not having the reserve. So I have huge concerns about that. So my concern would be location, location, location to maximize the use for the community. My concern would be if you're going to have open and free space, make open and free space, make it open and free. At least make sure that I and other people with playing age kids can actually go in there every once in a while and not pay to mess around. If everybody's got to pay to go in there, then what's the point? I don't want to build a facility here in Janesville thinking that we're building a national tournament venue for other people to come here. I want to build a facility that we are going to use and we are going to really like. And then if people come in from out of town, I can assure you they're not going to care if they have to drive from Milton Avenue to downtown to get there. So the location doesn't really matter to those people. And the final thing is I would pare it back as much as humanly possible, because I would be concerned about long-term operational costs. If you keep it small, you can redo the dome in 15, 20 years, 25 years. The other thing to keep in mind here is I love hockey. I love everybody in the hockey. I'm a baseball parent, and I have a lot of parents who are baseball and hockey, and I had a lot of hockey parents say, your kid's got to play hockey. And my affectionate response to them was, I'm already in one cult. I'm not going to join another. Okay? So we all know this, and it's a friendly joke, but it's a joke. But the thing about it is, in Janesville, you have in Janesville a dinosaur of a baseball program. Because Janesville Youth Baseball and Softball sort of is standing alone in the state as the only youth baseball and softball program that has that many people playing in it. They have 500, 700 people. There's a reason that that's the case. And the reason is, when we went out to the sports complex, ever since we went out there and we said to the city, we will never come back to you for a subsidy, because we know what our operations are like. We know we will make money on this. We know we won't have to come back to you. And we will fund the continued improvements. So it's a one-time investment for you, but you get the benefit forever, which is the model that they did with JPAC and other places. But the other thing that we've always done is we've always said the league comes first, which means the kids in the city come first, not our tournament team. And what I have seen in the baseball world is that in a tournament environment, which is what we're building this facility for, travel tournaments, that kind of thing. If Johnny's dad thinks Johnny should play shortstop and lead off, and he doesn't in our tournament program, then there's a risk that Johnny's dad will take Johnny and 10 other kids out of our program and go form a private travel team. And that dynamic has been going on for about 30 years, and that dynamic has slowly killed your local leagues, because it's impossible to run leagues. It costs a lot of money to run a local league. It takes a lot of effort. It takes comparatively zero to run a private team that pays entry fees to go to travel to different venues. So what I'm concerned about, also, meta concern that I really haven't stated yet, is I'm concerned about the health of Janesville Youth Hockey. I'm concerned about the health of Janesville Youth Basketball, or Janesville Basketball Association, which I helped to form. I'm concerned about the health of JYBSA and all the other things. And I do not want to see us build a tournament facility at the expense of, well, we're not supporting the local operators. And so, to your concerns, we want to have a facility for the local kids to use. they need to have organization on top of that that's going to funnel them, organize the teams, run the programming, get them the coaches, get them the insurance, get them all that stuff they need. And I don't see anybody talking about that in this. And I see people ignoring, like I have asked, I've asked the JYBSA people, have you been told what it's going to cost you to rent this facility for an hour? They do not know. If they do not know, then if it comes out to be $250 an hour, they're not going to go there. And so it's not going to be a community asset. So those issues have to all be sorted out in my judgment.
And to add to that, as much as our working group is focused right now on these facility recommendations, we are beginning a process of, what are going to all of our youth sport organizations, evaluating what are the needs for coaches, what are your needs for umps or refs, what are your needs for equipment. So those questions for us in our working group we're spending almost as much time on those questions as we are facility.
There's so many different things that it seems like your process in Beloit has embraced. It's different than the process we've embraced. Here, in your particular process, you've got youth sports that frankly is the driver. That's the organization that is keeping the wheels on the track. I'm not necessarily certain that's the case here in Janesville. So to your credit, I have to tell you that from a process perspective makes a great deal of sense. We've got just a few minutes left here, and I want to kind of bring this full circle and see if we can't get to a point where we've got a solid direction for where we go. One of the frustrations that I hear a lot as I make my treks through the community is the fact that there's a lot of people that feel like this project, the Woodman Sports and Convention Center, is a done deal. That we just throw our hands up and it's going to happen irrespective of what anybody else thinks. And one of the reasons why we have these forums is to help people to better understand the dynamic that's going on, in the hopes that they don't walk away with that frustration that this is a done deal and that they have no input into the future. From a Beloit project perspective, I would have to tell you that I really admire the fact that you have pulled this together to this stage, at least, with the focus that you have. And I think that there's a lot of things that going forward you can learn from the mistakes of your neighbors. And I would hope that you're paying a close attention to that. In the time we've got left, what is the timeline? What's the next steps for Beloit? Where do you want to be, say, a year from now? And what's going to have to happen in order to get you down that road?
I would say in a year from now, hopefully we have coalesced around something in that report or something else. If something else comes out that's not what the experts that are not, admittedly they're not from Beloit. They're not locals. They do this for a living, and that's what their expertise is, but they're giving their best informed opinion on what we should do, but the people of Beloit have to decide what we're going to do. So hopefully our small group expands out some more and we get some more people that want to join into this discussion locally and figure out what that topic is and what the it is that I was talking about earlier, and that maybe by this time next year we're doing that next step and we're doing a feasibility study on how do we pay for and operate the facility that's selected that we're going to try and go after. We know it's a long process, and as Celestino said, we have to be patient, and there's a lot of steps to go on this thing to get to something, and there's no guarantee, as you were just talking about, there's no guarantee at any point that it's going to happen. Anything could come along to change the information that you have. So hopefully we just keep moving forward, and by this time next year we've got some more headway onto one specific thing that we're really trying to chase down.
And ultimately, within our recommendations, Huddle Up Group recommends all three. This isn't, left, right, center conversation.
Mm-hmm.
This is all three are great recommendations to move forward with and would make a positive impact for the youth of our community. Hypothetically, to Matt's point, we hope that one recommendation moves forward. hypothetically, we could have 3 different projects all on different tracks.
Simultaneously.
Yeah, at some point in time. So this is
And for clarity, the 3 projects are the flat fields.
Flat
the-
Fields, ice, and our Diamond Complex.
And the Diamond Complex. So there's a lot of potential and a lot of things for us to pay attention to.
Absolutely.
Duffy, is it a fait accompli that this is a done deal from your perspective? What would be your guidance to people that want to continue to ask questions? How should they interact to make sure that people pay attention to the questions that they have? How do you get your message? Because you're offering some alternatives here that I think are important.
Well, I want to, if I may, I want to revisit what I was saying, just finish one thing. I'm concerned about our hockey program. And I've told our hockey program, I've got friends who are on their board and are the presidents, and I said, you're going to move over here, but as part of coming over here, you're not going to have concession revenue anymore. That's part of the deal. You're going to pay more per hour for ice. How are you going to, what's going to happen to your pro forma? Are you still going to be successful? Are you going to have to raise your rates for your players? Is that going to affect your participation? So at the end of it, at the core of my thoughts are the health of those groups. One thing I would do to improve the process is, I know everybody who's involved in this. I know the lawyers who represent Rockstep. I know city staff. I know all of them. I know Janesville. I know Chris Rebout at Visitors and Conventions Bureau. They're all friends of mine. But everybody who I saw present to the city council when they voted to approve the borrowing, obviously had a conflict of interest in recommending that they do this. The hockey group wants it because they need new ice. We know that. It's okay that they have a conflict of interest, but they have a conflict of interest. JACVB has a conflict of interest. They want a new convention facility. City staff wants a new facility because they're in Parks and Rec and they don't have any new facilities given to them in a long time. Why wouldn't they want a new facility? And the Janesville Jets want a new facility for obvious reasons. So those were the people who are presenting, and they all want it. Well, if they all want it, it's not a problem that they all want it. They should want it. But the people who are making the decision are the people on city council. And when I look at this process, what I see is, when I mentioned, I talked to Jennifer Petrozello in 2019, and I was saying, well, how are you going to raise money for this, et cetera? And they were working on it, and I trust city staff, but I thought city staff would be acting as a critical eye, as a devil's advocate, as a gatekeeper of sorts, and a guardian of the public treasury. So we know JCVB wants this, and we know hockey wants this, and we know other people want this, but it's got to make sense. The operational thing has to make sense. And it's bugged me that, how do the city staff, it doesn't appear to me that they've been asking that type of question. At least not in my mind, because if they read the same reports I am, they should be asking, at least they're like red blinking lights on the instrument panel. They're obvious. They're not rocket science. And I have concerns that maybe Mark Freitag, who I know and like, really wanted to get out of town and get a new job, and so this would be a feather in his cap too. And I would say that to his face and say, I'm concerned about this, Mark. But what I really think has to happen is a city council, and this is what I told the city council when I was there, they have to be asking harder questions of city staff than contestants on Shark Tank get asked when they are pitching those people on Shark Tank that they want to invest in their business. Okay, so city council members need to drill into this and not just, you can make a vote today on city council and you can say, well, I've got my name on a plaque on this building and I helped make this building happen. And then get off the city council and then you've hung an anchor around the city's neck because it's got this operational loss. And I think if you're going to make the decision to vote in favor of this facility, you have to assure yourself that you are not also saddling the future taxpayers of the community with burdens that they weren't anticipating. Now because what happens is if this place operates at $1 million a year loss, the city's got to come up with the money somewhere. And the city's going to either cut services or raise taxes, and so it's not going to be the picture that we have now. And then everybody's going to look back at this council and go, what was going on with them? Okay, so I just think that if the city council members do their job and do due diligence, I think in fairness to them, they got a lot of work to do, they got a lot of meetings to go to, they got a lot of people to listen to, and they rely on city staff to tell them this is a good thing or a bad thing. And I think city staff, for some reason, has had a blind spot on this. I don't know why that is, but it's not too late for them to get clarity and focus on this. And I think with clarity and focus, everybody involved in this is well-intentioned. I think everybody involved in this, we can get to a right-sized result for Janesville that gets us a new ice arena and gets it, I think, in the right location, hopefully, and other things. But the fact that the money's been committed does not mean we have to be out at the mall just because the mall is contributing the property, that kind of thing. And I think all that stuff should still be on the table. I really do.
So what's the best guidance that we can give to John and Joan Q. Citizen if they still have questions today? How do you feed those questions to the city council so that the city council can ask the hard questions? Is the city council willing to ask the hard questions? Those are all sorts of things that we can't really predict. The final vote on this project isn't going to happen until after the election on April 4th or 5th. And there may be a new council that's seated at that point in time, or at least one new member on that council. If there's any guidance that I would suggest to anybody, if you have questions, get those questions to your city council members and don't be shy. Don't make it a one question and then run. Talk to them regularly with fresh questions and hope that they will carry through that thinking so that they'll make the right choices going forward. Because I would argue that one of the purposes of having this conversation is to help generate some questions for you and create an environment where hopefully you're willing to step forward and if you have questions or concerns, let the council know. Because there are alternatives. We've talked about alternatives. And frankly, if we sit back quietly and say nothing, then we truly have the prophecy be fulfilled. It can be a fait accompli. In the minute or so we got left, Matt and Celestina, final thoughts on the Beloit project. I'm excited for what you're doing.
Yeah, it's just really cool to have the opportunity to share at such an infancy stage in the project. We look forward to continuing the conversation, not only for the betterment of the Beloit region, but of all of Rock County, and this opportunity is just one step in that process.
Duffy, any final thoughts?
No. I mean, there's a ton of thoughts, but I appreciate you inviting me to talk about this. I do think that there are a lot of people in this community who have a lot of experience. I know that if you polled everybody I served on the JYBSA Board of Directors with, they would say the idea that we are going to host all kinds of national tournaments and other tournaments here week after week after week is an idea that we don't have any evidence in our lived experience that it will actually happen. That's not to say that it can't happen, but it is to say we would really like to see the organizational plan for how you're going to pull that off. And I put on my Facebook post that in what I see in the plan for the business operation right now is hope. And what I said, of course, is hope is not a plan. The citizens of Janesville should insist on knowing what the plan is. And in my judgment, that means the city council needs to interrogate city staff in a friendly way, but interrogate city staff in their thought process and say, explain to us why you're recommending this. I mean, I think if you had a city staff person, if you challenged them and said, I want you to sign off and guarantee me that this is going to happen, no way. No way. So, and if you ask them, and the other thing, the final thing I guess I would say to the city council is this. There is no business out there that plans a new business venture that assumes that we're going to hit this number. There's a range of outcomes. There's a good outcome. There's a great outcome. There's a bad outcome. There's a totally terrible outcome. Depending on what your assumptions are and what goes bad and what goes well. And I think what we've got here is the best case scenario based on hope, and we don't have any consideration being paid to the worst case scenario. And I think that there should be some consideration paid to the worst case scenario. And I think good people of good intent and good faith can come up with a lot of good ideas on how to hedge that. And there's more ideas than I would have to offer on that. But that process hasn't happened yet. And I think it's frankly, I will temper my words. I don't think it's a good idea to build this big facility without knowing how you're going to operate it. So.
That's what I wanted to hear.
Well, there you have it. It's a conundrum. We have choices that we can make. If you have questions, it's one thing to sit back and just kind of chew on it yourself and then go on to the next question. It's another thing to take those questions and talk to your elected officials and share those questions with them in the hopes that they'll ask those very questions that you're raising. I would hope that it isn't a fait accompli, that it isn't something that we just, they will build it and we'll succumb, to use a trite phrase. We just don't want it to be that way. So And for the Beloit project, I've got to compliment you again on you're involving the community at the front end, and that makes a world of difference in the outcome that you should be anticipating. Best of luck going forward. Thank you, folks, for joining us tonight. Our guests will be willing, I'm sure, to stick around for a few minutes and visit with you individually. Have a great evening.